The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Willowbrook Academy, one of England's most prestigious private schools. Students in crisp uniforms hurried past the tall iron gates, their voices mixing with the sound of car doors closing as parents dropped off their children for another day of lessons. Princess Charlotte walked through these same gates every morning, her blonde hair neatly braided and her school bag slung over her shoulder. To her classmates, she was simply Charlotte, a bright, friendly girl who loved art class and had a particular talent for making others laugh. The fact that she would one day inherit one of the world's most famous titles seemed almost secondary within these protected walls. The school had been carefully chosen by her parents specifically because it offered normalcy. Here, Charlotte could raise her hand in mathematics class, eat lunch with friends in the cafeteria, and participate in school plays without the constant weight of royal protocol. The headmistress, Mrs. Pemberton, had worked closely with the royal security team to ensure Charlotte's safety, while maintaining the everyday school environment that her parents desperately wanted for her. Charlotte had made genuine friendships at Willowbrook Academy. There was Emma, who shared her love of horses, and James, who always made her laugh during lunch break. These relationships meant everything to her. They were built on shared jokes, common interests, and the simple bond of childhood, rather than her royal status. The morning routine at Willowbrook was always the same. Charlotte would arrive at 8:15, just like every other student. She would hang her coat in the cloakroom, collect her books from her locker, and make her way to her first class. The teachers treated her with the same expectations and standards as any other pupil, which was exactly what her parents had hoped for. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something felt different. Charlotte noticed it first in the way Mrs. Pemberton glanced nervously at her during assembly. Then she saw how Mr. Davies, her favorite history teacher, seemed distracted during his usually animated lesson about the Tudor period. Even Emma mentioned during morning break that her mother had received an unusual phone call the night before. The first real sign of trouble came during lunch. Charlotte was sitting with her usual group of friends, sharing stories about their weekend activities, when she noticed a black car with tinted windows parked just outside the school gates. It wasn't unusual to see expensive cars at Willowbrook. Many of the families were wealthy, but this one was different. It had been there for over an hour, and Charlotte had noticed the same car on her way to school that morning. What Charlotte didn't know was that earlier that morning, a heated conversation had taken place in the offices of Clarence's house. Camilla, Queen Consort, had made a phone call to Mrs. Pemberton that would change everything. The conversation had been brief but firm, and by the time it ended, the headmistress was reaching for her emergency contact list with shaking hands. The royal protection officers assigned to Charlotte had their own communication channels, separate from the school's administration. When the call came through their secure line at 11:30 that morning, the lead officer, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell, felt her stomach drop. The message was clear and urgent. There had been a significant change in the security assessment for Princess Charlotte's current school placement. Inspector Mitchell had been protecting members of the royal family for over 15 years. She had seen political tensions rise and fall, had managed everything from peaceful state visits to emergency evacuations. But this situation felt different. The usual protocols weren't being followed, and the timeline they were being given seemed impossibly short. The afternoon classes proceeded normally, with Charlotte completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. During art class, she worked on a watercolor painting of the school's garden, carefully mixing blues and greens to capture the way sunlight filtered through the old oak trees. Her teacher, Miss Reynolds, complimented her technique, and Charlotte beamed with pride. It was during the final period of the day, English literature, that Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway. She knocked softly and gestured for the teacher, Mr. Thompson, to step outside. Charlotte watched through the classroom window as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. When Mr. Thompson returned, his expression was carefully neutral. but Charlotte noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he picked up his book. The dismissal bell rang at 3:15, just as it did every day. Students began packing their bags and chatting about homework assignments and after-school plans. Charlotte was looking forward to her riding lesson that evening. She had been working on perfecting her jumping technique, and her instructor had promised they could try a slightly higher fence today. But as Charlotte gathered her things and headed toward the door, Mrs. Pemberton appeared beside her. The headmistress placed a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder and spoke in a low voice that only she could hear. The words seemed to echo strangely. "Charlotte, dear, I need you to come with me to my office. Your security detail is here to collect you." Charlotte's heart began to race. In all her years at Willowbrook Academy, she had never been called to the headmistress's office. She wasn't in trouble. She was certain of that. But the serious expression on Mrs. Pemberton's face suggested something far more significant than a simple administrative matter. As they walked down the corridor, Charlotte could hear her classmates' voices fading behind her. Emma called out, asking if she would see her tomorrow, and Charlotte turned to wave, not knowing how to answer. The hallway suddenly felt much longer than usual, and each step seemed to echo more loudly than the last. Inspector Mitchell was waiting in the headmistress's office, along with two other officers Charlotte recognized from her daily security detail. Their expressions were professional but kind, and Inspector Mitchell stepped forward with a reassuring smile. "Hello, Charlotte," she said warmly. "We need to have a chat with you about some changes to your school arrangements." Charlotte looked between the inspector and Mrs. Pemberton, confusion evident on her young face. "Changes? What kind of changes? Did I do something wrong?" Mrs. Pemberton knelt down to Charlotte's level, her voice gentle but strained. "Oh, sweetheart, you haven't done anything wrong at all. You've been a wonderful student, and we're going to miss you terribly. But there have been some decisions made about your education that are beyond our control." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Miss her? Why would they miss her unless she was leaving? But that couldn't be right. Her parents had never mentioned anything about changing schools. Just last week, her mother had helped her choose a topic for her upcoming science project. Inspector Mitchell explained that they needed to leave immediately, that her belongings would be collected later, and that her parents would explain everything when she got home. But Charlotte barely heard the words. All she could think about was Emma, who would be waiting by their usual meeting spot after school, and James, who had promised to show her his new football cards tomorrow. As they walked toward the black car waiting outside, Charlotte turned back to look at Willowbrook Academy one final time. Students were streaming out of the building, laughing and chatting as they headed home. Some of them waved when they saw her, not understanding that they were saying goodbye. The car door closed with a heavy thud, and as they drove away, Charlotte pressed her face to the window, watching as her school, her friends, and her carefully constructed normal life disappeared behind them. She still didn't understand what had happened or why, but she could feel that everything was about to change. The journey back to Kensington Palace felt endless. Charlotte sat in the back seat of the armored vehicle, watching familiar London landmarks pass by through bulletproof glass. The city looked the same as it always did, but everything felt different now. Inspector Mitchell sat beside her, occasionally offering reassuring smiles, but Charlotte could sense the tension radiating from all the adults around her. When they arrived at the palace, Charlotte's parents were waiting in the private family sitting room. Her mother immediately rushed to embrace her, and Charlotte could feel the tremor in her arms as she held her tight. Her father stood nearby, his jaw set in a way that Charlotte recognized meant he was trying very hard to control his anger. "Mummy, what's happening?" Charlotte asked, her voice small and confused. "Mrs. Pemberton said I can't go back to school tomorrow, but why? I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she knelt down to Charlotte's level. The explanation came slowly, carefully worded to be appropriate for a young girl's understanding, But the core truth was devastating. There had been what the adults called political disagreements about Charlotte's education, and certain family members had decided that Willowbrook Academy was no longer suitable. Charlotte listened with growing disbelief as her parents explained that someone had made phone calls, exerted influence, and essentially forced the school to remove her. The details were kept vague. She was too young to understand the complex family dynamics and power struggles that had led to this moment. But the result was clear. Her normal life had been taken away. "But Emma and James," Charlotte whispered. "They'll think I just disappeared. Can I at least call them to say goodbye?" The pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. Her father cleared his throat and explained that contact with her former classmates would need to be carefully managed now. The world they had tried so hard to protect her from, the world of royal protocols, security concerns, and public scrutiny, had suddenly crashed down around her. That evening, Charlotte sat in her bedroom at Kensington Palace, staring at her school bag that someone had retrieved from her locker. Inside were all the ordinary things that had been her life just hours before: half-finished homework assignments, a friendship bracelet Emma had made for her, a funny drawing James had passed her during geography class. These small treasures now felt like artifacts from a lost civilization. Meanwhile, in secure communication rooms across London, a very different conversation was taking place. Inspector Mitchell was on a conference call with senior members of the Royal Protection Unit, and her voice carried an edge of barely controlled fury that her colleagues had rarely heard. "This wasn't done through proper channels," she was saying, her professional composure cracking slightly. "We had comprehensive security arrangements in place at Willowbrook Academy. The threat assessment hasn't changed. This decision puts the princess in a more vulnerable position, not a safer one." The response from her superiors was measured but clear. Regardless of their professional opinions, the decision had been made at the highest levels of the royal household. Their job was to adapt and protect, not to question family decisions. But Inspector Mitchell had been protecting Charlotte for 3 years. She had watched the young princess blossom in the normal environment of Willowbrook Academy. She had seen how important those friendships were to Charlotte's development, and she understood better than most how devastating this sudden change would be. What made Inspector Mitchell's jaw clench with anger was that she knew this decision had nothing to do with Charlotte's safety or well-being. Through the complex network of communications that existed within royal circles, she had learned that the order to remove Charlotte from school had come from Camilla, and it appeared to be connected to broader tensions within the family about how the younger generation should be raised. The inspector had dealt with family politics before. It was an unavoidable part of protecting royals. But this felt different. This wasn't about scheduling conflicts or minor disagreements about public appearances. This was about a child's education and happiness, and it had been decided without considering what was best for Charlotte herself. The next morning brought a parade of tutors, educational consultants, and private school representatives to Kensington Palace. Charlotte sat through meeting after meeting as adults discussed her future as if she weren't there. They talked about academic standards, security arrangements, and social development programs, but none of them asked what she wanted or how she felt about leaving her friends behind. One potential school emphasized their experience with high-profile students. Another highlighted their advanced security facilities. A third spoke about their programs for children dealing with family trauma. Charlotte listened to it all with growing dismay, realizing that none of these places would ever give her what Willowbrook Academy had: the simple gift of being treated like a normal child. Between meetings, Charlotte's mother found her sitting in the palace garden, throwing pebbles into the ornamental pond. The dejection in her daughter's posture broke her heart, and she sat down beside her on the bench. "I know this is hard, sweetheart," she said softly. "And I know it feels unfair." "It is unfair," Charlotte replied, her voice flat. Why does she get to decide about my school? Why does she get to take my friends away? Her mother struggled for words. How could she explain to an 8-year-old the complex dynamics of royal family hierarchy? How could she describe the way certain family members wielded influence and power without making it sound like a fairy tale gone wrong? Sometimes adults make decisions that affect children, and those decisions aren't always the right ones, her mother finally said. But your father and I are going to make sure you're happy and safe, no matter what. What her mother couldn't tell her was that behind closed doors, a battle was being waged for Charlotte's future. Phone calls were being made, meetings were being demanded, and for the first time in years, the carefully maintained public facade of royal family unity was showing serious cracks. Inspector Mitchell had made her own phone calls, reaching out through official channels to express her concerns about the security implications of Charlotte's sudden school change. Her report was detailed, professional, and devastating in its assessment of how the decision had been handled. The report pointed out that Willowbrook Academy had been thoroughly vetted, that comprehensive security measures were in place, and that Charlotte's safety had never been compromised. It noted that the princess had been thriving academically and socially, and that her psychological well-being was directly linked to the stability and normalcy the school provided. Most importantly, the report questioned whether the decision to remove Charlotte from school had been made with proper consideration of security protocols, or whether it was the result of what Mitchell carefully termed non-security-related family considerations. The report landed on several very important desks, and by the afternoon, Inspector Mitchell received a call requesting her immediate presence at a high-level security briefing. She knew her career might be on the line. Questioning royal family decisions wasn't typically career-enhancing behavior for protection officers, but she also knew that her primary duty was to Charlotte's well-being. Back at the palace, Charlotte was struggling through dinner, picking at her food while her parents tried to maintain normal conversation. The dining room felt too large, too formal, after months of eating lunch in Willowbrook Academy's bustling cafeteria. She missed the chaos of students chatting and laughing, the way Emma always tried to trade her apple for someone else's chocolate, the comfortable routine of everyday school life. That night, Charlotte lay awake in her ornate bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Through her window, she could see the lights of London spreading out into the distance, and she wondered what Emma and James had thought when she didn't show up to school that day. Did they know what had happened? Did they understand that she hadn't chosen to leave? What Charlotte didn't know was that across the city, Inspector Mitchell was sitting in a secure conference room, facing some of the most senior officials in the Royal Protection Service. The meeting had been called in response to her report, and the atmosphere was tense. The lead official spoke carefully. "Inspector Mitchell, your report raises serious questions about recent decisions affecting Princess Charlotte's security arrangements. Are you prepared to stand behind your assessment that this change was unnecessary from a security standpoint?" Mitchell looked around the room at faces she had worked with for years, people who understood the delicate balance between protecting royals and respecting family autonomy. But she also thought about Charlotte's tear-stained face and the way the young princess had looked back at her school one last time. "Yes, sir," she said firmly. "I am prepared to stand behind every word of that assessment." The emergency meeting that followed Inspector Mitchell's report brought together officials who rarely found themselves in the same room. Senior members of the Royal Protection Service sat alongside private secretaries, constitutional experts, and even a representative from the Prime Minister's office. The issue had escalated far beyond a simple family disagreement about schooling. The meeting began at dawn in a secure briefing room beneath Buckingham Palace. Inspector Mitchell presented her findings with clinical precision, outlining how Charlotte's removal from Willowbrook Academy had violated established security protocols and failed to serve the princess's best interests. Her voice remained steady as she detailed the potential risks created by the hasty decision and the lack of proper consultation with protection services. Sir David Whitmore, the senior protection coordinator, listened with growing concern. He had served the royal family for 30 years and had navigated countless delicate situations. But this felt different. The protection of royal children was sacred territory, governed by strict protocols designed to keep them safe while allowing them as normal a childhood as possible. "Inspector Mitchell," Sir David said carefully, "your assessment suggests that Princess Charlotte's removal from school was initiated without proper security clearance or consultation. That's a serious allegation." Mitchell nodded. "Sir, the decision appeared to be made unilaterally by the Queen Consort, without input from the princess's parents or her protection team. We had no advance notice, no opportunity to assess alternative arrangements, and no consideration of the psychological impact on the child." The constitutional expert, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, leaned forward. "What you're describing could constitute an overreach of authority. While senior royals have significant influence, decisions affecting the direct line of succession require careful consideration and proper protocols." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Camilla's decision to force Charlotte's removal from school had created ripple effects far beyond what she had anticipated. The hasty action had not only disrupted Charlotte's life, but had also exposed serious questions about decision-making processes within the royal household. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Charlotte was sitting through another interview with potential tutors. This time, it was a stern woman who spoke about discipline and proper royal deportment. Charlotte listened politely, but inside, she felt like she was being fitted for a prison rather than an education. Her father appeared in the doorway halfway through the interview, his face set in an expression Charlotte had rarely seen. "I'm sorry," he said to the tutor, his voice carefully controlled, "but this interview is over." After the woman left, Charlotte's father sat down beside her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked directly into her eyes. "Charlotte, I want you to know that your mother and I never agreed to your removal from Willowbrook Academy. This decision was made without our consultation, and we're working to fix it." Charlotte felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "Does that mean I can go back? Can I see Emma and James again?" "We're trying, sweetheart," he said, though his expression remained cautious. "But it's complicated. There are people who think they know what's best for you, and they don't always listen to what your mother and I want." What Charlotte didn't know was that her father had spent the previous evening in heated phone conversations, demanding explanations and threatening consequences that hadn't been used in royal family disputes for generations. The carefully maintained hierarchy that kept the royal family functioning was being challenged, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Back in the secure briefing room, the meeting had reached a crucial point. Sir David Whitmore was reviewing protocols that hadn't been invoked in decades, guidelines that dealt with conflicts between different branches of the royal family when a child's welfare was at stake. "The Protection Service has primary responsibility for the safety and well-being of direct heirs," he stated. "If we determine that a decision negatively impacts that well-being, we have not just the authority, but the obligation to intervene." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "The historical precedent is clear. The protection and proper raising of children in the direct line of succession supersedes the preferences of other family members, regardless of their rank." Inspector Mitchell felt a surge of relief. For the first time since this crisis began, it seemed like Charlotte's best interests might actually be considered. The decision that emerged from the meeting was unprecedented in modern royal history. Sir David Whitmore would personally intervene, using his authority as head of royal protection to reverse Camilla's decision and restore Charlotte to Willowbrook Academy. It was a move that would send shockwaves through royal circles, but the officials present agreed that the child's well-being had to come first. The phone call to Clarence House was brief and professional, but its impact was immediate. Sir David informed Camilla's private secretary that the removal of Princess Charlotte from her school had been deemed inappropriate and would be reversed immediately. The language was diplomatic, but the message was clear. This decision would not stand. Camilla's response was swift and furious. Within an hour, angry phone calls were flying between royal residences, and the palace staff could sense the tension crackling through the normally serene corridors. But Sir David had the backing of both constitutional precedent and security protocol, and more importantly, he had the full support of Charlotte's parents. The call that Charlotte's mother received that afternoon brought tears of relief to her eyes. Sir David's calm voice delivered the news. "Ma'am, Princess Charlotte will be returning to Willowbrook Academy tomorrow morning. All necessary arrangements have been made." Charlotte was in the garden when her parents found her, still throwing pebbles into the pond, her shoulders slumped with dejection. When they told her the news, she looked up with such hope and disbelief that it broke their hearts all over again. "Really?" she whispered. "I can really go back?" "Really," her father said, lifting her into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "And this time, no one can take that away from you without going through your mother and me first." The next morning, Charlotte walked through the gates of Willowbrook Academy with a security detail that was notably more robust than before, but her step was light and her smile was radiant. Emma and James rushed to greet her, full of questions about her mysterious absence, and Charlotte realized that some things really could be fixed, even when they seemed impossible. Inspector Mitchell watched from her position near the school entrance, a small smile playing at her lips. Her report had done what she hoped it would. It had reminded everyone involved that Charlotte was not just a princess or a future queen, but a child who deserved protection, stability, and the chance to simply be herself. Mrs. Pemberton welcomed Charlotte back with genuine warmth, though the headmistress now understood that their school had become the center of a royal family battle. The security arrangements were more visible now, but the school's commitment to treating Charlotte normally remained unchanged. In her first class back, Charlotte raised her hand to answer a question about fractions. And the normalcy of it, the simple act of being a student among students, felt like the most precious gift in the world. The aftermath of the crisis continued to reverberate through royal circles for weeks. Camilla's authority to make unilateral decisions about other family members' children was quietly but firmly curtailed, and new protocols were established to prevent similar incidents in the future. But for Charlotte, the most important outcome was much simpler. She was back where she belonged, surrounded by friends who cared about her for who she was, not what she represented. During lunch that first day back, Emma asked if she wanted to trade her apple for a chocolate bar, and Charlotte laughed with pure joy at the beautiful ordinariness of the question. Inspector Mitchell continued her watch from a respectful distance, knowing that her intervention had not just protected a child's education, but had helped preserve something infinitely more valuable: Charlotte's right to be young, to have friendships, and to grow up with at least some pieces of a normal life intact. The lesson had been learned, though not without cost. The royal family's carefully maintained unity had been tested, protocols had been challenged, and relationships had been strained. But in the end, the protection of a child's well-being had prevailed over personal preferences and power struggles. Charlotte finished her first day back at Willowbrook Academy with paint-stained fingers from art class, homework in her backpack, and plans to meet Emma at the stables that weekend. As Inspector Mitchell escorted her to the car that afternoon, Charlotte looked back at the school with satisfaction rather than fear, knowing that this time she would be returning tomorrow.